My name is Cozy Taylor, and I'm chairman of the board of the Family Place, and I want to welcome all of you here today to our 6th annual policy luncheon. And this policy luncheon is a special one because we have one of our own board members speaking today, so something to look forward to. I have just a couple of quick thank yous. Please eat your soup or whatever you want as I talk. I will not be offended. First, I'd like to invite you to thank our amazing sponsors for this event, many of whom have representatives in this room. So we are really grateful because we could not do this day without you. So a round of applause for our sponsors. Also, of course, to Coventry Catering, to the Hotel Coolidge, and to Valley Flowers for these wonderful flowers up here on head table. I would also like to tell you that the Families Learning Together participants created your recycled and very jazzy centerpieces, and you may start now, if you like, determining who gets to take them home at the end of the event. So thank you Families Learning Together participants. I would also like to ask any members of the staff of the Family Place to stand up just for a moment so you can, if you're on the staff, Julie, would you stand up just for a moment, please? So, and if you have any questions about the Family Place, these are the people who know all the answers. I would also like to invite at this time one more group to stand up, and that's if you are a board member or a strategic advisor of the Family Place. Would you please stand? Thank you so much, and you'll notice that they are sprinkled liberally around the room, and that's because at the end of today's talk we'll be having a chance to have table conversations about the important topics that we are going to talk about today. So with no further ado, enjoy your lunch, and I'll be back to you shortly. I'm going to introduce you to our Executive Director, Nancy Bloomfield, and Nancy arrived at the Family Place after an illustrious career with other terrific nonprofits in the Upper Valley. She is approaching her first anniversary at the Family Place, and we are so grateful for her dedication to the work, her collaborative style, and her ability to rise to absolutely any occasion. Please join me in welcoming Nancy Bloomfield.
How's this? Can everyone hear me too in the corners? Okay. So please keep enjoying your lunch. I hope everyone is enjoying their meal and the company. It's really nice to see you all here. And I appreciate just having a few minutes to talk with you about the Family Place before we turn it over to our guest speaker. So for anyone who's new to us, because I think there may be a few people in the room who may not know the Family Place too well, we are one of 15 parent-child centers in the state of Vermont. So in this community, we also offer supports to family on the New Hampshire side of the river too. And our goal is to help families get off to a healthy start through a variety of programs, some that are offered on site at our campus on Route 5, the yellow buildings you might pass on the way to and from King Arthur or the Farmers Market. And we also do a lot of home visiting, so much of our work is taking place throughout the Upper Valley. Just a few acknowledgments before I jump in here. And part of why I want to do these acknowledgments is because there aren't that many times during the year when the Family Place gathers a big group together like this. And so it's nice to just take a moment to recognize what a great thing it is that we have this community around the Family Place. So I know as I've been meeting people today and hearing who is going to be joining us today, that there are quite a few people in the room who have contributed significantly over many, many years to make sure that the Family Place could be in existence as a trusted resource for families in the community. And I really want to thank all of you, including current and former staff, current and former board members, donors, cheerleaders to the Family Place, community partners. Everyone has had an important role to play, so I want to thank you all for what you've done. And I hope that you'll forgive me, Elaine, for this, but I do want to draw attention to Elaine Gannett for a minute. If you didn't know this, she was executive director of the Family Place for 19 years and has moved on, but can't go too far because we've relied on her so much. She's been an incredible mentor and support to me, and I only hope to live up to your passion and commitment, Elaine. So I just thank you for all of your support. And I'd also like to acknowledge just how much it has meant to me to have such a strong and committed board of directors to work with, led by Posey Taylor here, who's also been a mentor to me. Posey, I put 3 words down here: committed, insightful, and upbeat. And all of those things have been so important to me in my first year. And so to all of you on the board, I just want to thank you for how hard you work and the stability that you've provided to this organization. And also, every day, I have the privilege to be able to work with a compassionate and competent group of staff. And Posey's already had the leadership team stand up. We also have Sasha and Hallie, who are here somewhere, waving from the back. They're behind the scenes, folks, and so they're behind the scenes right now. But they put this event on, and the Family Place staff really exemplifies what it means to work as a team, and I feel really fortunate to be a part of that. So we are here today to talk about why it is so critically important to direct our best thinking, resources, and efforts to ensure that all children are able to have a strong start in life. That's why we're here. Thanks to well-publicized research and the incredible public awareness of Let's Grow Kids, Vicki's here from Let's Grow Kids today, you've probably heard this statistic many times, but I think it bears repeating. That 80% of a person's brain is developed in their first 3 years of life. 80%. Tiny little kid, 80%. And I feel like knowing this really compels us to look at how well we as a society and also as an Upper Valley community are doing at creating the conditions that promote the best possible outcomes for these kids, for all of our kids. So what I would like to do in the few minutes I have is just to tell you about what investing in the next generation looks like at the Family Place every day. So for anyone in the room who doesn't know us as well, I just want to mention a couple things about the way we do our work. First, while it might seem obvious because our name is the Family Place, our work involves a whole family approach to helping children thrive. We work with children and their parents together, promoting positive parenting strategies and ensuring that the children are supported to meet their developmental milestones. And second, our approach is strengths-based. That may be a term we've heard a lot or not so much. We meet parents where they are. We identify with them what their needs and challenges are. We start with what's working well in a family. And then we partner with families to increase the presence of things in their lives that have been shown by research to make a real difference. Things such as the resilience of the parent, supportive social connections that are around a family, and a parent's knowledge of child development. These are all things that we help to foster in the parents that we're working with. The work we do at the Family Place is complex and it's challenging. And it's also a real honor to have a part to play in the lives of the families who come through our doors and whose homes we visit. After all, and I think this is important to say, because in some ways we're here to talk about challenges today and opportunities, but supporting families starts with celebrating childhood and celebrating parenthood and seeing the promise in every family that we meet. It's a line of work, I think, that's rooted in hope at the foundation. It's hopeful work. Throughout the week, the Family Place campus is a very alive place, and if you haven't been to visit us in a while, or if you've never been, I hope that you'll take the time sometime soon to come for a tour and see what goes on there firsthand. Parents are working hard in our kitchen, our childcare, and our Jewelrio's work sites, and in their education classrooms. Parents are sharing ideas and stories with each other during weekly play groups. Children are playing and learning in our childcare classrooms and on the playgrounds. And talented staff, including some who are here today, are making all of this possible, as well as driving as far as Blueberry, Rochester, Bridgewater to do home visits. We have a staff of 38. So as a parent-child center, our focus is on the unique needs of each family, and it is by nature, it's responsive and flexible and relationship-based work. It takes time to build relationships with families, and that's an important part of what we do. And as a parent-child center, part of our role is engaging with other community providers on both sides of the Connecticut River and statewide to assess needs and figure out how best to create the fabric of support for families that we desire. So just to ground things a bit in a story, I would like to share just a brief illustration of how the family place has been evolving in response to the growing number of babies in our community whose lives who have been affected by the epidemic of substance use that I think we're all aware of. Particularly, we've been pretty struck and affected by the number of babies who have been born exposed to substances such as heroin or prescription pain medication. And this epidemic, I think as most people know, is as present here in our community as it is anywhere in Vermont or New Hampshire. So to illustrate how we're bringing our approach, our family-centered and integrated approach to our work with families affected by substance use, I would like to tell you about a baby who I will call Emma for the purpose of the story today. So Emma had opioids in her system when she was born last year, and because it was determined when Emma was born that it would not be safe for her to stay in the care of her parents for now, she was placed in a DCF Family Services foster home. Fortunately for Emma, her parents were able to acknowledge that there was a need for court involvement. They were able to acknowledge that there were merits to the case, and they agreed to engage in a new program we have in our community, which I think is exciting. It's called the Safe Babies Program. And for those who don't know about the program, which is probably many of you, Safe Babies was developed by the national organization 0 to 3, and it was brought to our community by Department for Children and Families, Family Services, and Easter Seals of Vermont. We're the second district in the state to be trying out this new model, actually, so it's we're lucky that for the leadership that's made that possible. Linda James is in the back. So the Safe Babies model ensures that when infants and toddlers are in state's custody, that their developmental needs stay at the forefront as progress, as the teams are working together and as the decisions are being made, including their need for a secure attachment to a caregiver and their need to have timely permanency, so their need to know who's going to be raising them, maybe more quickly than an older child might. So the family place plays a key role in the Safe Babies program. I just want to describe that for you. So we serve on the advisory council, but also each baby and family in the program receives home visiting support through Children's Integrated Services. So for baby Emma, this means that her health and development are monitored and supported by our Children's Integrated Services nurse, Kelly French. Kelly has been able to support Emma's foster parents and also her parents during their visits to help them understand how best to respond to some of the symptoms that she's had due to having drugs in her system at birth, and to help make sure that her development is staying on track. So she's getting weekly home visits by our nurse. And also, each Safe Babies family is engaged in a model of therapy called child-parent psychotherapy, and Tanya McMurray, our mental health clinician and clinical director, is doing that work. So we see this as a promising model for helping families and especially young babies, because this work supports and strengthens the parent-child relationship, which helps to repair this little baby's sense of safety, and it helps to promote her healthy attachment. And as we're learning, we know so well, that healthy attachment and that sense of safety are critical building blocks for her cognitive and behavioral and social functioning now and later in life. So on Monday afternoons, Emma's parents attend a program called Parents Together, which is a new program on our campus. This is a program we're offering in partnership with Second Growth. Second Growth is one of our neighbors on Route 5, and they've been a key community partner to us. They specialize in support for folks who are in recovery from substance use. So actually our partnership has been something that each of our organizations has wanted to cultivate. All of this is made possible by funding from the Boyle Community Pediatrics Program from Children's Hospital at Dartmouth. And I think Kathy Stalker is somewhere in the room, but I lost you, Kathy. There's Kathy. The Boyle program has been a great support to the Family Place, and it was through their support that we've been able to offer this program that Emma's parents have been participating and really committed to every week. So while Emma's parents' recovery journey has not been without bumps, the structure of the Safe Babies program has ensured that there are timely interventions to help them get back on track. So I suppose this is a story of how, because the Family Place is offering supports to families in so many different ways, that some of the families and children who are most in need can take advantage of many of those supports at a place where they can develop comfort and feel at home. So I hope that telling you about our work with Emma and her family gives you just a window into the complex and hopeful work that we do at the Family Place. And sharing this also gives me the opportunity to let you all know just how much your generosity has meant and what it allows us to do in the community. Particularly, our work with the Safe Babies program and also this Parents Together program are funded by community donations. I think many of you know a lot of our programs receive state funding, and these are programs that would not at all be possible if it weren't for local community donations. So I just want to thank you. I want to thank you again for joining us today, and with your support, we're going to continue to contribute to better outcomes for the more than 1,500 children and their families that we work with every year. We really could not exist without your support, and so I really am grateful to you today. I want to give you a hand. So without further ado, I know you're looking forward to hearing from Charlie, and I'd like to invite Mary Brown, a longtime board member and friend to the Family Place, who's going to introduce Charlie.
Thank you, Nancy. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. Many of you might know that April is the month of the young child, and that's why we schedule this event when we do. As Nancy said, this is our 6th year of doing that, and so we hope to bring focus to the issue, not just today, but for the extension of the month, and that some of your thoughts and actions might reflect this effort. So as Nancy said, I'm a longtime board member at the Family Place, and I'm here to introduce our guest speaker. And it brings me such pleasure, as it isn't every day that a man is happy and able to speak about the importance of early childhood. The issue seemed for far too long to be relegated to the domain of women and less serious forums for discussion. Today, things are different. Today, we have the science behind the importance of early childhood efforts, the hard data from neuroscientists that validate the intuitive and experiential evidence many of us have witnessed for years. Today, we can identify, quantify, and predict the long-term outcomes of however these critically important early years are spent. Charlie Whelan, senior lecturer and policy fellow at the Rockefeller Center at Dartmouth, began his early career familiar with this data. He earned his BA at Dartmouth, his master's in public affairs at Princeton, his PhD in public policy at the University of Chicago, and spent a good deal of time with the renowned economist and Nobel laureate James Heckman, whose research explains that high-quality early childhood programs have shown substantial benefits in reducing crime, raising earnings, and promoting education, to name just a few. As one who's skilled at persuasive reporting, Charlie has written for The Economist, the Chicago Tribune, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Yahoo Finance, and has authored 7 books. If you Google him, you'll see he's the founder of the Centrist Party, a devoted husband, and the fun-filled father of 3. He's here today to share the data on why investing in early childhood makes good economic sense And I'm happy to introduce the Family Place's acclaimed economist, author, beloved teacher, and dad. Charlie.
Well, a fun-filled father of 3. We'll go with most days on that. So we'll get this up. So thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's always hard to speak in front of strangers. It's way harder to speak in front of people I know. I'm going to have to face all of you people at the co-op. Things don't go well. But what we're going to do is hopefully speed through about 60 years of anti-poverty policy in 20 minutes. So I'll give you the punchline at the end, which is what Nancy and Mary have already said. There is now a consensus across social science that the best investment we can make, for a variety of reasons, most having to do with brain science, having to do with equipping young children so that they're more productive in later school years, economics and so on, the most productive investment we can make is early on. The metaphor I will give you for this is that when I was in grad school, we kind of assumed that the mind was like a bucket. And when you were born, you got your bucket, and as you proceeded through education, we filled your bucket with knowledge. And if you missed a few years, then we would just double up and we'd do remedial and we put extra stuff in your bucket. What we have since learned, and I'm going to talk a lot about Jim Heckman's work, is that what happens early on, particularly 0 to 3, even in the womb, determines the quality of your bucket. It's not about just filling it up. It's that if those years are stressed, inadequate, undernourishing, you name it, then your bucket has holes in it. And everything thereafter that we put in is less effective than it would otherwise be. And so from an economic standpoint, we're going to talk about some numbers. One of the reasons that early childhood is such a strong investment is that it makes all subsequent investments more productive. And conversely, if you don't equip kids from 0 to 3 to sit still and learn in primary education, then it's going to cost you a lot more down the road. I'll actually tell you the most personal Jim Heckman story. So I arrived at the University of Chicago in 1993 to start my PhD, and as fate would have it, some of you may have kids who've just gotten into college, they did the admitted student day just for PhD students, and Jim Heckman was the leader. And he took us to one of his research sites, which was a Job Training Partnership Act site, which was the big federal program for training older workers. And Heckman was studying the effectiveness of that program. What he learned was that it didn't work terribly well. That it's kind of hard to teach people who are older new skills, and even when it does, it's really expensive and it's not a terribly cost-effective way to use funds. At the same time, Heckman was studying the GED, the graduate equivalency degree, to see how people who finish the GED do relative to high school grads. And he found that that was disappointing too, in part because when people dropped out of high school, there were other things going on besides the stuff that you typically learn in high school, which he went on and others have described as kind of non-cognitive skills. And Heckman was the one at that point who said, wait a minute, this seems very late in the life cycle to be investing. And he was the one, later went on and won the Nobel Prize for other things, who said we've got to go earlier, earlier, earlier. Heckman is also important because I'll tell you, he's not a warm and fuzzy guy. And which is, actually turns out to be really important. This is not, some Norwegian leftist who said, he's really mean, actually. I worked for him as a professor. He's brilliant in his own way. But early on, when he discovered the importance of early childhood education, he would go on public radio in Chicago and he would say, look, the benefits of early childhood education pay for themselves in reduced prison costs alone. And the handlers of the university are like, let's work through that answer and see if we can put a softer spin on that. So as we go to the first slide, there's somebody hit the arrow up there. So what I'm going to do is kind of get to that point. So the whole discovering the leaky bucket analogy. And I'm going to go back to the New Deal, Great Society, the anti-poverty programs that most of us grew up with, because they didn't change that much after that time. And there's a reason you got an old guy with a pipe here. The marquee programs that came out of both the New Deal and the Great Society had a number of things in common. One is they treated poverty mostly as an income problem. You're poor, you don't have enough money, we'll give you more money, problem is over, right? Or food, we'll give you food, right? And which is true from a strictly consumption standpoint. It is not true in terms of the pathology of poverty. There's a lot more going on. We dealt primarily with older Americans, right? So it's not true that America is parsimonious with our social programs. We just spend most of the money on old people, right? Which is Medicare and Social Security. Oh, yeah, I know. I'm not going to take it away from you, don't worry. But there was very little orientation towards children, right, in those programs, other than things that trickled down. School, free and reduced lunch programs, women's, infants, and children, and so on. But that was, again, mostly around the income and food and basic necessities, not about equipping the next generation to be more productive citizens. There was also, and this is kind of ironic in hindsight, there was very little discussion of family structure. If you remember the old aid for families with dependent children, AFDC before welfare reform, you were only eligible if you were a single mother. The reason for that was that coming out of the New Deal, the only single mothers typically, or certainly in the eyes of Congress, were people who were widowed. And it was actually conservatives who said widows should not have to work in order to receive these funds. And if you remember the dysfunction leading up to welfare reform, if you went to work and you were receiving AFDC, there would be a one-for-one trade-off. Any money that you earned, you would lose from your welfare benefit. And if you got married, you would lose your benefits entirely. Right? So this set up the titanic political battle that probably characterized most of your childhoods and young adulthoods, which was people on the left saying, look, we just need to be more generous with our social welfare programs, and people on the right saying that's the problem, that there is a behavior responsibility problem around poverty, and if we're more generous with people, they'll just do more of the things that made them poor in the first place. Now, I bring that up in part because those are largely irreconcilable positions. It was hard to battle over it, even when you get to welfare reform in 1996, which you had Bill Clinton signing and also Newt Gingrich, right? Go figure. The compromises they made were largely around work, right? They came to agreement, yes, we will be generous with people, but we'll do it through the earned income tax credit, so we'll be generous for people who work, and we'll subsidize it through the tax code. We will put term limits on it, 5 years, so people can't milk the system. And we will reward two-parent families. So you can now you can be eligible if you have children and you're a two-parent family. But there was still very little discussion of children. All of that is really kind of a rehashing of what had characterized social policy for 50 or 60 years. So we go to the next slide. All right, so let me fast forward to where we are now on the just snapshot of America, and then talk about why Jim Heckman and others played such a role and where we need to go on the social policy side. Now, I'll describe these. You don't necessarily have to discern what's on the graphs. This one is interesting in and of itself because this comes from a really important report. If you want to go home and read something that was co-produced by the American Enterprise Institute and the Brookings Institution. This is like the Yankees and the Red Sox coming together to do anything. AEI is typically more leans right, Republican-oriented. Brookings is kind of center-left. They're both very good research shops, but they have very different political points of view. On this, they agreed. In the first slide here, this is earnings by percentile from 1979 to the present. And you should notice three things. One is people at the top, this is all adjusted for inflation, people at the top have done very well. You've seen almost 70% real income growth over the past 40 years. Two other things should jump out. One is, not shockingly, people at the bottom haven't done very well at all. The 10th percentile, so those who've done least well in the labor market, have seen their earnings frozen in place effectively over that whole period, almost 40 years. But the really striking thing is the median, the 50th percentile, is almost indistinguishable from the 10th percentile. Over that period of time, the median worker in America has seen no real wage growth. And so, without getting too political, when you look at what's happening with Donald Trump and you look what's happening with Bernie Sanders, there's a lot of anger out there. There are different flavors of anger, but I'm going to suppose that a lot of it has to do with enormous frustration over failure in the labor market, that we have not provided economic opportunity for effectively half of America. Let's go to the next slide. There's another thing that's going on that is in some ways complementary. This is family structure, which people have tried to talk about in different structures over history, and it often becomes so political and so toxic, they retreat. But while that has been happening, there is a remarkable trend going on in America. So roughly 35 out of 100 births to white women are non-marital births. In the African American community, it is 7 out of 10. So roughly 3 or 4 out of every 10 births in America are non-marital. And I'll come back to why that is so important, because family, if you are somebody who is struggling in the labor market, and you have only a single parent household, you've just got one oar in the water. And if you are relatively low skilled, it's not a very good oar. These two things are a reverse synergy. A lot of what's happening in the marriage market, and that's what economists actually call it, I know it's not very romantic, reflects what's happening in the labor market. If you look at the data on African American men, a high proportion of whom are in jail or under the jurisdiction of the criminal justice system, they're not marriageable. That's how that's described. Again, I apologize for the social science jargon, right? But it's also true that if young men are failing the labor market, they're less attractive as mates. There's a lot going on. And of course, it goes the other direction as well, which is if you're failing the labor market and you also don't have a two-parent family, you have less structure and support there as well. So this is where we are, right? And clearly, this is not where we need to go. So if you have the next slide, what ought we do about it? All right, well, this brings together the last two, which is if you look at poverty by household type, you have roughly 33% of children in a single-parent household are living in poverty. 1 in 3 in the richest country in the history of civilization. All right, so now we'll go to the next slide. What ought we do about it? All right, so on the left you have Jim Heckman getting the Nobel Prize in Sweden. On the right you have the brain. What happens in the 90s? So curiously, while we're doing welfare reform, you have this robust period in the social sciences where cognitive scientists are starting to appreciate all of the things that happen in the brain. As Nancy alluded to, 80% of it being developed in those first 3 years. Meanwhile, people in K through 12 education are saying, wait a minute, if kids arrive in kindergarten unprepared to learn, it's very difficult for us to make up that difference. And then you have Heckman coming along saying, wait a minute, the research on what we can do with adults is just not that compelling. And I'll show you what the parallel research shows with regard to interventions earlier on in a second. But first I want to tell a very personal story. This is the moment when all this stuff for me went from being intellectual to being emotional and real. So I'm at the University of Chicago, I'm studying all this stuff with Heckman, I kind of appreciate the importance of early childhood, the brain, blah, 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 right? And meanwhile, I've got young kids, I'm working for The Economist, my kids are in a co-op preschool in Chicago that seems to cost a lot more than I'm willing to pay. And it's a co-op, which means in addition to writing these checks, I've got to go in and vacuum once a month and pass out carrots, right? So, I'm there, I'm writing for The Economist, my British chauvinistic male editors calling saying, is the story done? I'm like, no, I can't talk to you right now, I'm passing out carrots. Pardon me? Like, never mind, right? So I'm vacuuming, and, but, I'm watching that, and I'm thinking, they're sitting on the carpet, they're clapping, they're singing, I'm picking up the carrots, it's cost me a lot of money, whatever. You fast forward not that many years, my wife, who was in the software industry, went on to teach in a high-needs area in Chicago. She taught on the South Side. It was 99% low income, and I think they were rounding down. Right? It was a deeply disadvantaged school that served a single housing project in Chicago, and actually because the housing projects in Chicago had begun to require some work and other kinds of things, this was the place where people who could not qualify for other forms of assisted housing ended up. So it was a really, really disadvantaged population. And she ended up in 3rd grade. And I remember her coming home in the first couple of weeks saying, I can't teach these kids. I can't get them to sit still. If someone bumps into somebody, it turns into a fight. I can't get them to understand what we're trying to do. Right? And she was worried, really all the way through the end of the year, that she was losing these kids, that it was too late. And that was the moment for me when it all came together. I thought, wait a minute. Well, I was busy vacuuming, and I still was never happy about that. But while I was busy vacuuming, the miracle of getting 18 2-and-a-half-year-olds to sit quietly on a carpet and to line up and to take turns and to raise their hands. And that meant when all of those kids, including my daughter, go on to school, they are ready to learn. And that was the moment when it all came together. And that is what we were trying to do for everybody in America. If we can't do that, right, then we destine those kids to be underinvested in for the rest of their lives. So let's go to the next slide. What does this actually mean? Well, one of the things that came along at about the same time was a famous social science experiment called the Perry Preschool Project. So just so give me a sense, how many of you have heard of the Perry Preschool Project? All right. In the 1960s, there was you have to describe it as an experiment. This is not jargon. It actually was experimental in that there was a very intensive preschool program targeted for families in Michigan who were disadvantaged. I think most of them were African American. They were all low income. And it was experimental in that everybody who wanted to apply could apply. Some families were sorted in, other families were sorted out. I mean, this is a controlled experiment. Everybody wanted to be there. This isn't just about the selection effect. Those kids were exposed to a very intensive preschool education. It was not cheap. It cost in current dollars about $11,000 per student per year. It was academic. It involved home visits. It was all the stuff that we now know you have to do if you want to engage kids at that age. Well, the remarkable thing about Perry is that the kids were followed, but not just first grade, third grade, fifth grade. They've been followed throughout their lives, including up to high school, and then to age 20, and then to age 40. And what you see here is, I mean, first of all, even though we have this erroneous belief that IQ is largely unmalleable, it actually had a significant effect on their brain development on the IQ side. They were 65% of them graduated from high school as opposed to 45%. 25% owned their own home at age 27 as opposed to 5%. And you can go on and on and on. I've actually got some more because this is remarkably important. So at age 27, there's a 44% higher rate of having graduated from high school. There were 50% fewer teenage pregnancies. By the time you get to age 40, they are 46% likely to have served time in prison, 42% higher incomes, 26% likely to have received any kind of government assistance. Right? And this is something that we did to 3- and 4-year-olds. Some of them were only in the program for 1 year. And we can say, because of the nature of the program, that this is what caused everything that we saw thereafter. So when Heckman sees this, he and other economists then conclude that we're looking at benefits on the order of $6 or $7 for society for every dollar that we're investing in these kinds of programs. Can we get the next slide? All right, that's what we should be doing. So what are we doing? What is society doing? So this is my favorite publication, The Economist. Right? When I was vacuuming, I should have been writing for them. The Economist did a piece on what they're describing as a hereditary meritocracy. Now that doesn't really make any sense at all. Because when we think about hereditary anything, you're passing down money, you're passing down land, and so meritocracy is you're all earning it on your own. Well, the essence of the piece is what's going on in society is this cleavage between the haves and the have-nots as described by education and capabilities, leaving money aside. And those who are relatively privileged with regards to skills and education are passing that privilege on to their kids in the form of things like reading bedtime stories, not because I'm leaving you a large bequest, and that families that do not have that kind of advantage are not passing that on to their kids. So if we could have the next slide. And this I'm going to have to walk you through, because some of you may be able to see it, some may not. But the first is, it manifests itself in family structure. So everything I showed you before about the importance of family structure with regard to poverty is also reflecting education. So there's been a decrease in marriage across all groups, all ethnicities, and so on. But the place where you see the highest rates of marriage, the lowest rates of divorce, and the highest rates of marriage, still, the lowest drop, are among people with a college degree. Right? So think about what that means already, and we're going to keep going here, which is people with a college degree are the ones who are doing best in the labor market. And just a mini labor market aside, what's happened over the second half of your lifetime is the personal computer and the internet came along, making everybody who's highly skilled more productive, and everybody who's less skilled redundant. Right? Think about ATM machines, ticket kiosks, all the places where people who used to do manual jobs have been replaced by technology, and then all the college grads designing that technology, that's a pretty good encapsulation of the labor market over the last 25 years. So now you have family structure compounding what's already happening in the labor market. Next slide. And then, so how many of you have children or grandchildren in college? All right, how many of you would be horrified to know that these campuses, including Dartmouth, are bastions of assortative mating? It's going on like crazy. Right? I tell parents that when they come. Like, anyone know what that actually means? Okay, I'll give you a clue. That's my wife. We met freshman week at Dartmouth. To be a clue, assortative mating is when like people marry like people. It has always been true across religion, ethnicity, and so on. Only recently has it become true across education. The best way to remember this is 40 years ago, doctors married nurses. Today, doctors marry doctors. Right? So now we've got the third point at which you're seeing this cleavage. You're seeing it on skills, you're seeing it on skills marrying skills, and you're seeing it in family structure of highly skilled people. Right? If you go more. Here's how it manifests itself in parenting. The first upper left is, the lighter line is parents with a bachelor, or parents with no high school degree. This is family structure again. So you have over 60% of children 0 through 7 living in a single parent family if the parents have no more than a high school education. Among folks with a bachelor's degree or more, it hasn't moved much, it's below 10%. But look at the one on the bottom left, which is time spent in developmental care with the child. That is reading to your student, it's helping with homework and those kinds of things. And again, you see this cleavage between those who are relatively high skilled, passing on those skills to the parents, and those often because they don't have the time, they don't have the expertise, or what have you, who are not passing it on to their kids. Now this, I taught in an education class in the winter. We were doing this kind of stuff. I went to King Arthur Flower to grade papers about this. And I sat down at one of those little tables away from the main area, so I thought I'd have quiet. Up walks this mother with her 18-month-old child, plops him down right next to me. I think, oh God, this is going to get bad. Remember, I think doesn't like back to me. And the first thing she said, this kid like is pre-verbal. The first thing she says is, "Are you going to chew that with your incisors or your molars?" She says, "Look at those snowflakes falling gently." You could be here, by the way. Actually, this could be what are you going to tell your father about the trip that we had to Canada? And I'm thinking, this is what I've been teaching. And so I start like live emailing to my students quotes from what this woman said. So clearly exhibits the point that I'm trying to make. Okay, next slide. All right, so the takeaway before we transition back to what the family place does and why it's so important is this is really dangerous in the long run, right? So it was always dangerous that people who are rich pass down land and money, and we're not really a society that has that, but we do a little bit. But it's very dangerous if people born into disadvantaged circumstances see that compounded over time. There's really a possibility that we grow into a society of the haves and the have-nots. And I would urge you to read that report by AEI and Brookings, because they were the ones who came to this conclusion that we across the political spectrum share this belief. The other book I would recommend, and it's not happy reading, is the Robert Putnam book. I think it's either Our Children or Our Kids, right? Which talks a lot about this, and that how the new divide is not necessarily along racial or ethnic lines, it is along educational lines, and it is being transmitted across generations. The reason I think it's really dangerous, and the reason I alluded to the presidential race earlier, is I think people are starting to worry that the fix is in. Now, they may be blaming Wall Street or something else. I think the causes are everything that I just described, which in many ways are harder to deal with than just slapping regulations on Wall Street. But this is a Gallup poll. And in 1952, when Americans were asked the question by Gallup, some people say there's not much opportunity in America today, the average person doesn't have much chance to really get ahead. Others say there's plenty of opportunity and anyone who works hard can get as far as they want. Which one comes closer to the way you feel about this? In 1952, 87% said there's plenty of opportunity. When you fast forward to 1997, you still have 81% of folks saying there's plenty of opportunity. When you get to 2012, it falls all the way down to 52%. I suspect if we asked it again, we might have already crossed. right? So what does this all mean? It means that if we are going to be responsible as people in the Upper Valley, as citizens, there is, according to social science, a place where intervention makes the most sense. It is in helping fragile families, because family structure and that kind of support matters, and it is investing in young children for all the reasons that I described and for reasons that people who know far more about the brain science can tell you. But that is, if you're just a hard-hearted capitalist, that's where you should spend your money. If you are a softie, that's where you should spend your money. I mean, my pessimistic note is we're not doing it, right? I mean, if you look at the presidential race, there's been way too little discussion of how we can make that next generation more productive. My optimistic note is there's no reason that two political parties can't agree on this. Right? At the outset, I described a political cleavage that was very difficult to overcome. This debate over whether giving people more money makes them more irresponsible or whether it helps them out of a hole. That was something we fought over for 50 years. Nobody can claim that investing in a 2-year-old makes that child more responsible. Right? Oh, he'll just start smoking. Right? No. That's a hard argument to make. Right? So in theory, both political parties, the traditional social support of the left and the belief in equal opportunity of the right? Everything that Republicans believe in is predicated on people getting up to the starting line and having a fair shot. They should share a belief in this investment opportunity. The fact that they have not means that we at the Family Place are an outlier and other people doing this Herculean work should be leading the way, but it does mean that there is a huge potential opportunity for us as a nation to redirect our social spending to enormous effect. So thank you very much. We'll go to the next slide. You guys are going to break down into discussions for a few minutes. Just go forward on the questions. And these are some things that I think you can kick over, but you're free to talk about however you want. The one is, as an economist, I will tell you the only long-term solution is upskilling of America. You are not going to bring back the jobs. Forget Mexico, forget trade. If you want to focus on where the jobs have gone, think about CVS on Main Street. Right? CVS now has those auto kiosks, right, when you check out. Right? That used to be somebody who was a clerk. It has replaced a low-skilled worker. And on net, has it destroyed jobs? Probably not, because there are a bunch of Thayer grads from the engineering school in Dartmouth who are writing that software, designing those machines, and so on. It has made those who are educated better off. It has made those who are low-skilled redundant. That's the only long-term solution, is to upskill America. The wall, I think, probably not. All right. The politics, everything that I described seems so obvious to me as a social scientist, but clearly it has not captivated the political arena. We know it's a bit of a circus right now, but it is something that people should be able to agree on. President Obama, to his credit, did float a big investment in early childhood education, and it was kind of victim to all the partisanship that other things have fallen victim to. Family structure, very difficult to talk about, but the reality is that what is happening in this country, leave aside the morality of it, because that's a total dead end. How many of you remember Murphy Brown? Right, that's not the way we want to go. This is when Dan Quayle took on Murphy Brown, who happened to be a fictional television character for her decisions revolving around having a child out of wedlock. Right? We need to just think about this as it's harder to row with one oar. Right? And so anything we can do to support families of any kind, but two-parent families are just easier in many respects. And for those of you who are parents, you know how hard it is no matter what you're doing. And then the last question is, I think we should think and talk about what makes the Upper Valley different. I mean, we've got more transportation challenges, we've got the opioid crisis, we've got other things that other parts of the country don't have to deal with, but then we have some benefits that other parts of the country don't have. So we, being nested here, need to think more deeply about how we can support families in the place that we are. So I'll leave it to your tables. Thank you very much for supporting the Family Place and for being here today.